Hello, welcome to Axiom Flux News with myself PJ, and joining me on the panel I've got Blackhole Bridger. Still suffering from a bit of the Flux lag from yesterday's Flux News, but without further ado I will pass over to Blackhole for his reports for tonight. Hello Blackhole, are you there? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm here and I'm not too bad at all, thank you, and good evening to everybody. I'll start with my first article. It was Professor Mikhail Chossudovsky giving a presentation at the International Conference on the New World Order, a recipe for war or peace. So we're banged straight off into a video to get you straight into the swing of things. And it's all to do mainly with the Middle East.
Prominent academic and author Dr. Mikhail Chossudovsky warned that the so-called war on terrorism is a front to propagate America's global hegemony and create a new world order. He was speaking at the International Conference on the New World Order, Recipe for War or Peace. Dr. Chossudovsky said terrorism is made in the US and that terrorists are not the product of the Muslim world. According to him, the US global war on terrorism was used to enact anti-terrorism laws that demonized Muslims in the Western world and created Islamophobia. Elaborating on his argument, Dr. Chossudovsky said that NATO was responsible for recruiting members of the Islamic State, while Israel is funding global jihad elements inside Syria.
Al-Qaeda and the Al-Qaeda affiliated organizations, including the Islamic State, are not independent organizations. They are sponsored, and they are sponsored by the United States and its allies. It is documented that prior to 2011, there was a process of recruitment of mujahideen to fight in Syria, and this was coordinated by NATO and the Turkish High Command. This report is confirmed by Israeli news sources, and unequivocally we are dealing with the state sponsorship of terrorism, the recruitment of mercenaries, the training and the financing of terrorism. As much as possible, the United States has delegated its authority to other partners, despite the fact that ultimately this is an initiative of US intelligence coordinated with the US State Department and the Pentagon.
Dr. Chossudovsky, who is also the founder of the Center for Research and Globalization, further emphasized that the global war on terrorism is a fabrication, a big lie, and a crime against humanity. Echoing Dr. Chossudovsky's arguments, Malaysia's prominent political scientist, Islamic reformist and activist Dr. Chandra Muzaffar said that the US has always manipulated religion to further its global hegemony on sovereign states. For example, he said the Arab Spring was brought about by Colonel Muammar Mohammad Gaddafi's resistance to US dominance. Earlier, Dr. Chossudovsky launched his new book titled The Globalization of War.
Well, this book is ultimately a reflection on how a global military agenda affects a series of countries, and it also looks into the issue of nuclear war. It is coupled with a broad historical overview. And start with a historical overview, then we get into nuclear war, nuclear energy, the day of Fukushima, and then there's a series of chapters on countries, including Yugoslavia, Haiti, Iraq, Iran, and also more recently on Ukraine, to give a perspective on how this global military agenda is applied for different countries in different parts of the world, and with the ultimate purpose of destabilizing and transforming sovereign countries into territories which are then open space for Western foreign investment.
The one-day conference was organized by the Perdana Global Peace Foundation, founded by Malaysia's former Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad.
Terrorism is a war that can never be won. It's an ongoing war, and this is why terrorism is used as a pretext for war and for bringing down different countries. My first article is from newswire.com. The global war on terror is a fabrication. Terrorism is made in the USA. Professor Michael Chossudovsky, International Conference, The New World Order, a Recipe for War or Peace. Prominent academic and author Dr. Michael Chossudovsky warned that the so-called war on terrorism is a front to propagate America's global hegemony and create a new world order. Dr. Chossudovsky said terrorism is made in the US and that terrorists are not the product of the Muslim world. Elaborating on his argument, Dr. Chossudovsky said that NATO was responsible for recruiting members of the Islamic State while Israel is funding global jihad elements inside Syria. Dr. Chossudovsky, who is also the founder of the Center for Research and Globalization, further emphasized that the global war on terrorism is a fabrication, a big lie, and a crime against humanity. Echoing Dr. Chossudovsky's arguments, Malaysia's prominent political scientist, Islamic reformist, and activist Dr. Chandra Mustafa said that the US has always manipulated religion to further its global hegemony on sovereign states. My next article that is going along on the same vein of how all this is brought about and how the Middle East is being manipulated for their ends. This article is from the 21st Century Wire. Qatar West claim that this is a public statement by Al-Nusra will wipe away jihadist sins. Operation Mop-Up and Clean Sweep are now underway as NATO and its allied intelligence agencies begin the PR effort to push their paid terrorist mercenary fighters to the background in preparation for another go at bringing down the nation state of Syria. This past September, that's September of 2014, we learned that the US-backed moderate rebels, aka the Free Syrian Army, also known as the FSA, along with the Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front, officially aligned themselves with ISIS. In a report this opening on Orient News. Looks like we got a Squigglegate from Scotland concerning the Robert Greene and Holly Gregg case. Just a private in-joke. Squigglegate was so-called Squigglegate because people writing to the Scottish establishment was all getting letters answered, and a signature with just a squiggle which was unreadable. So let's go back to where we were.
I was just about to say there, Paul, the Arabic writing is a lot more beautiful than Squiggle's signature. Let's put it that way.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Squiggle's signature was so much like a snake, so maybe that was what's the word I'm looking for here? No, I better not say it. Anyway, and then republished in other Middle East-based news agencies. The Syrian rebels, the FSA, along with the ISIS jihadists, have signed a non-aggressive pact. We'll go on to that because the information is pertinent in these. Devil's Deal. US-backed Syrian rebels already signed pact with ISIS prior to Haynes' beheading. While Washington considers appropriating $500 million in funds to the Syrian rebels, we now learn that opposition groups, the Free Syrian Army and Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front, have officially aligned themselves with ISIS. Now you can see how these so-called terror groups are coming together under the auspice of the Americans, acting as a proxy for the Americans, being paid loads of money by the Americans and their allies, of course. Right, this image is masking the truth. An apparent member of ISIS featured in the PRIs. Now, the PR was absolutely outstanding, how we saw ISIS here, ISIS there, ISIS every bloody where. Excuse the French. Terror in Syria, despite grand words by US President Obama and British PM David Cameron, here's what's really behind their plan to bomb ISIS in Syria. In a report first appearing on Orient News, we won't go to Squigglegate again, and other Middle East-based news agencies, Syrian rebels, or FSA, along with ISIS jihadists, have signed a non-aggression pact in the suburbs of Syria's capital, Damascus. The ceasefire deal, brokered between so-called moderate rebels and the black-clad Sunnis of the Islamic State, have agreed that Assad is their principal enemy. The non-aggressive pact between rebels and jihadists came just as Washington and President Obama announced its grand strategy to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. The rebel terrorist deal was reportedly struck this past Friday, that was September last year, the 12th of September, in Syria, preceding the latest seemingly staged execution video released by ISIS. Yes, and it was a bit of a fiddle, I do believe. The anti-Assad Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has reported that the two parties will respect a truce until a final solution is found, and they promise not to attack each other because they consider the principal enemy to be the new Syrian Assad regime. How will it be possible for Washington to vet the so-called moderate rebels in Syria now that they have aligned efforts with ISIS? How can all these rebel and terrorist groups who share the same goal of regime change in Syria, along with Washington and his allies, be expected to now split and take sides to fight ISIS? The simple answer is they won't. So why are US political leaders and media so keen to hide this cooperation pact between Washington FSA rebels, that's the Free Syrian Army rebels, Al-Nusra and ISIS? Because this was the plan all along. Remember, this latest agreement between ISIS and the rebels should be looked at objectively for what it really is. And the New York Times piece from December of 2012. We'll have a quick look at the piece from the New York Times. We have the spinning wheel.
It doesn't seem to be loading, Paul.
Here we go. Syrian rebels tied to Al-Qaeda play key role in war. Oh, look at this, disgusting. All just because people want power. In May in Damascus, Syrian workers removed debris from 2 car bombs that were linked to the Qaeda-backed Nusra Front. Baghdad, the lone Syrian rebel group with an explicit stamp of approval from Al-Qaeda, has become one of the uprising's most effective fighting forces, posing a stark challenge to the United States and other countries that want to support the rebels but not Islamic extremists. Money flows to the group, the Nusra Front, from like-minded donors abroad. Its fighters, a small minority of the rebels, have the boldness and skill to storm fortified positions and lead other battalions to capture military bases and oil fields. As their successes mount, they gather more weapons and attract more fighters. Mercenaries as well, mainly. The group is a direct offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Iraqi officials and former Iraqi insurgents say which has contributed veteran fighters and weapons. This is just a simple way of returning the favour to our Syrian brothers that fought with us on the lands of Iraq, said a veteran of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who said he helped lead the Nusra Front's effort in Syria. The United States, sensing that time may be running out for Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, hopes to isolate the group to prevent it from inheriting Syria or fighting on after Mr. Assad's fall to pursue its goal of an Islamic State. As the United States pushes the Syrian opposition to organise a viable alternative government, it plans to blacklist the Nusra Front as a terrorist organisation, making it illegal for Americans to have financial dealings with the group and most likely promoting similar sanctions from Europe. The hope is to remove one of the biggest obstacles to increasing Western support for the rebellion. The fear that money and arms could flow to a jihad group that could further destabilise Syria and harm Western interests. When rebel commanders met Friday in Turkey to form a unified command structure at the behest of the United States and its allies, jihadi groups were not invited. The Nusra Front's ally Al-Qaeda in Iraq is the Sunni insurgent group that killed numerous American troops in Iraq and sowed widespread sectarian strife with suicide bombings against Shiites and other religions religious and ideological opponents. The Iraqi group played an active role in founding the Nusra Front and provides it with money, expertise and fighters, said Majid Faisal al-Izawazi, an Iraqi security official who tracks jihadi activities in Iraq's Anbar province. But blacklisting the Nusra Front could backfire. It would pit the United States against some of the best fighters in the insurgency that it aims to support. While some Syrian rebels fear the group's growing power, others work closely with it and admire it, or at least its military achievements, and are both loath to end their cooperation. Leaders of the Free Syrian Army, the loose-knit rebel umbrella group that the United States seeks to bolster, expressed aspiration that the United States, which has refused to provide weapons throughout the conflict that has killed more than 40,000 people, is now opposing a group they see as a vital ally. The Nusra Front defends civilians in Syria, whereas Americans didn't do anything, said Mossab Abu Qatada, a rebel spokesman. They stand by and watch. They look at the blood and the crimes and brag. Then they say the Nusra Front are terrorists. He added, America just wants a pretext to intervene in Syrian affairs after the revolution. The United States has been reluctant to supply weapons to rebels that could end up in the hands of anti-Western jihadists, as did weapons that Qatar supplied to Libyan rebels, with Americans' approval, that is. Critics of the Obama administration's Syria policy counter that its failure to support the rebels helped create the opening that Islamic militants have seized in Syria. The Nusra Front's appeal to Syrian fighters seemed to be working. The recent meeting in Damascus, Abu Hassan al-Afghani, a veteran of insurgencies in Afghanistan, Iraq and Libya, addressed frustrated young rebels. They lack money, weapons and training, so they listened attentively. He told them he was a leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, now working a Qaeda branch in Syria, and by joining him they could make their mark. One fighter recalled his resonant question, who is hearing your voice today? On Friday, demonstrators in several Syrian cities raised banners with slogans like "No to American intervention, for we are all Jabhat Al-Nusra," referring to the group's full name, Ansar Jabhat Al-Nusra li al-Sham, or supporters of the Front for Victory of the People of Syria. One rebel battalion, the Ahara or Freeman, asked on its Facebook page why the United States did not blacklist Mr. Assad's terrorist militias. Another jihadist faction, the Sabah Army in the Levant, even congratulated the group on a great honour of being deemed terrorists by the United States. Even anti-government activists who are wary of the group, some deride it as the Taliban, said the blacklisting would be inefficient and worsen strife within the uprising. To isolate the group, they say the United States should support mainstream rebel military councils and Syrian civil society, like the committees that have sprung up to run rebel-held villages. The Nusra Front is far from the only fighting group that embraces a strict interpretation of Islam. Many battalions have adopted religious slogans, dress and practices in what some rebels and activists call a pragmatic shift to curry favour with Islamic donors in the Persian Gulf countries. One activist said he had a fighter friend with a fondness for Johnny Walker's Black, who is now sporting a beard to fit in. Not all religiously driven held rebel groups embrace the Qaeda vision of global jihad. The International Crisis Group said in a recent report, some have criticised the Nusra Front as serving the interests of the Assad government, which seeks to paint its opposition as terrorists and foreigners. The Nusra Front is the only Syrian rebel group explicitly endorsed by Al-Qaeda in online forums, the report said. The group gained prominence with suicide bombings in Damascus and Aleppo in early 2012 that targeted government buildings but caused heavy civilian casualties. It was the first Syrian insurgent organisation to claim responsibility for suicide and car bomb attacks that killed civilians. Many of its members, Syrians, Iraqis and a few from other countries, fought in Iraq, where the Syrian government helped funnel jihadists to battle the American occupation. In Iraq's Diyala province, a former member of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq said that a leader and many members of the group were fighting in Syria under the Nusra Front's banner. An Iraqi security official there said they travelled through Iraq, Kurdistan and Turkey to Syria. They are well trained mentally and military. Major Iswawi, the official in Anbar, said they are so excited about the fighting in Syria, they see Syria as a dream coming true. Syrian fighters also have Iraqi experience. Abu Hassan, a commander of the Tawhid and Jihad Brigade, which is not slated for American blacklisting and has taken a leading role in many battles, said he fought with Al-Qaeda in Iraq for 6 years. I decided to return to Syria because our people need me, he said, adding that his group was attracting secular young men because it could provide ammunition, training and medical care that non-jihadist groups could not. A 35-year-old Syrian musician who gave his name as Hakam said he decided to join the Islamist fighting group because he saw how well it planned and fought and how determined and professional they are. He said that he rarely prayed and had been a drummer in a casino. He apologised for mentioning the word, which had become distasteful to him, but that now he was pious and newly disciplined. He said that the group goal was an Islamic state in Syria ruled by strict Sunni Muslims, and that it would fight any secular government. Our mission won't end after the fall of the regime, he said. Some Syrians have complained of Nusra fighters trying to impose religious strictures on others, but Brian Fisherman, a fellow at the Combating Terrorism Centre at West Point, said that the Nusra Front appeared to have learned from the mistakes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which alienated Iraqis with its sectarian attacks and grisly beheading videos. The Nusra Front appears to be refraining from attacking other Syrian groups with the exception of clashes with Kurds in the north, where some rebels believe a major Kurdish militia sides with the government. Samir al-Sadi, an Iraqi from Diyala, who joined the regular Free Syrian Army, said that would change, predicting infighting after Assad's fall. After the fall of Bashar, there will be so many battles between these groups, he said. All the groups will unite against Al-Nusra. They are like a snake that is spreading its poison. Yeah, I can see a difference. There's going to be so much infighting, and this, I believe, is what the Americans are relying on, the infighting, because while they're fighting each other, that gives Americans a chance for a clean sweep. Anyway, let's go back to the main article here. Where did we go to? Right. Right. The ceasefire deal brokered between so-called moderate rebels and the black-clad Sunnis of ISIS signed a joint proposal that named Assad's regime their principal enemy. Yes, that's right, the whole invented ISIS crisis was, is and always will be all about regime change in Syria. It's what Saudi Arabia wants, and it's what Israel wants, and by extension it's what Washington and London want too. So it's already been decided. The only obstacle left is how to resell it to the public at large. Western boots on the ground. The vast majority of mercenary Islamic fighters in Syria come from outside of the country. So there are no moderate rebels as imagined by Washington's Liars Club. Since the beginning of the Syrian crisis in late 2010, I have been writing repeatedly that there are no moderate rebels in Syria. Many other credible researchers and even mainstream news organisations, albeit significantly after the fact, have made similar statements in their own writings. In fact, I've even gone so far as to suggest that if such a thing as a moderate rebel in Syria actually exists, then he must be brought forward for analysis. This is Patrick Ennison's writing, by the way, and Patrick always seems to be right on the mark. After all, such rare and mysterious thing must be thoroughly studied so as to determine if he is a freak of nature or if there is more than just one of him. Apparently, however, neither myself nor the other researchers mentioned above have fully understood the process in which one becomes an alleged rebel and or a moderate one. Thankfully, that question has been answered by the Obama White House and the mainstream media organisations that work as domestic propaganda outlets. The process by which one becomes a moderate rebel versus a radical jihadist is not by the common sense messages of radical clerics or by taking a firm stand against a totalitarian government, nor does one become a moderate rebel by joining Al-Qaeda, committing atrocities and imposing Sharia law. One becomes a moderate rebel by joining Al-Qaeda, committing atrocities, imposing Sharia law, and subsequently stating that you do not belong to stating that you do not belong to Al-Qaeda at that point. You are fit to receive all the funding available from the coffers of the GCC and NATO. Of course, the logic above is incredibly ridiculous, yet it is in fact this very logic that the State Department, NATO, and its puppet governments in the Gulf expect the American people and the people of the Western world to believe. This is because Qatar is now attempting to rebrand Jahadist Al-Nusra as a moderate rebel brigade operating inside Syria, and thus openly provide the Al-Qaeda branch with relatively sophisticated weaponry and training that is even more so than is already being provided, and in a much more blatant fashion. The requirement for receiving such weaponry openly that Nusra disavow its connections with Al-Qaeda. Of course, the suggestion that Al-Nusra is actually a separate organisation to begin with is an absolute falsehood. After all, Al-Nusra Front is merely the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda, in the same way in which Al-Qaeda in Iraq functioned as the Iraqi branch of Al-Qaeda in that country. Even the CFRs, which is the Council of Foreign Relations, Foreign Policy, was forced to admit that Al-Nusra is simply Al-Qaeda in Syria. There are few establishment critics of the plan, however. The Savile Group, a global security NGO, stated, and all Al-Nusra removed from Al-Qaeda on paper wouldn't mean an anti-Al-Qaeda Al-Nusra at heart. The history of the attempts to turn extremist groups into non-extremist, well-behaved proxies is riddled with failures and devastating blowbacks. Al-Nusra was formed to spread bin Ladenism into Syria, and its members are true adherents to the ideology. The truth, of course, is that the GCC, which includes Qatar, as well as the United States and NATO, have been supporting Al-Nusra all along. So there was never any need for Al-Nusra to break away from Al-Qaeda to reap the benefits of Western aid, which it refused to do. After all, Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Al-Qaeda proper have also been receiving Western funding from the very beginning of the Syrian crisis. Al-Qaeda was created by the US and NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as far back as the late 1970s.
Bin Ladenism, eh?
Thus, Al-Nusra as... Sorry, PJ?
I was just saying Bin Ladenism.
Yes, well, we all know it was all fake and all proxies.
Yeah, you see.
Thus, Al-Nusra has refused to abandon...
Yeah, sorry, Buck. I was just going to say, the thing with all this is it's, I mean, on the alternative media side of things, where they put across a lot of information exactly like these reports, but it's the worrying side of it all is, you know, every time there comes a threat, and then people are saying, no, it's propaganda, you know, don't worry about it, it's just another false flag, you know what I mean, don't get wrapped up in it, and then that's all right. But what if one day the ones that who apparently created all this decide to use that to their advantage. Do you know, if you know what I mean? And then they might turn around and say, well, you know what, it's really happening now, and all that time where...
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the mainstream are only putting out slight bits of information, that means the people haven't got the full facts. And if the people haven't got the full facts, therefore they will believe the propagandic version.
Would it be right to say that call it something like the crying wolf situation?
Yeah, in a way, but all along, these are always funded by the Americans and their allies, with being us also, and NATO.
Yeah.
And it's all purposely done, and it's all to usher in the New World Order.
Well,
it's all to give the complete hegemony to the United States, so they can usher in the New World Order. If they can collapse each and every country, that takes away all the opposition from when they want to introduce the New World Order. And people that say the New World Order, there's no such thing. Well, if they really listen to what I'm reading here and put the information into their heads and mull it over, they will really come out with the conclusion in the end of it. There is a New World Order.
Yeah, but there's people out there who talk about the things you've just been speaking about, Paul, and they say that all this stuff, you know, there's a bigger picture to it all, if you know what I mean. So they're like not getting involved in any of it anymore. I mean, I remain open. I just remain open-minded. I'm not really sitting on the fence, and I'm not on any side. I just basically look at what's being reported on as open-minded as possible.
Yeah.
And then try and put both sides across to those that are.
Yeah. But if you've only got half the information, you cannot make a proper assessment.
No, you can't. No, that's right. Yeah.
So you need all the details. It's like, as they say, with a computer, muck in, muck out.
Well, it's interesting because it does, you know, I shall be expanding on some of your articles with what I've got just after you. So, yeah, very good, Paul. Carry on.
Yeah, I know there's a lot here, and it's very detailed, but just the amount of it will show that all these groups are a proxy for the American NATO's war for hegemony of the world, and which is the New World Order. Anyway, here we go, we'll carry on. Thus, Al-Nusra has refused to abandon Al-Qaeda even on the surface, as AFP reports. Al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate Al-Nusra Front on Monday reaffirmed its allegiance to the global extremist network and denied any plan to break away and become a more internationally acceptable rebel force. The angry statement followed weeks of speculation on internet social networks of a split between the jihadist allies. Al-Nusra completely denies the reports of a breakup with Al-Qaeda. The group said in a statement released on Twitter, it said Al-Nusra remains the backbone of jihadists in Syria. The first inter-battle dedicated to unifying the ranks around Sharia, yes, Islamic law, righting injustice and defending the disadvantaged. Indeed, the idea that a mere verbal denunciation or formal declaration of opposition will change the fact that Nusra and Al-Qaeda are the same organisations is fundamentally irrational. For those who may have been easily confused in regards to events taking place in Syria by the frequent name changes and allegedly shifting alliances, it is important to remember that not only are there no moderate rebels operating inside the country, but those jihadist forces that are operating in Syria are nothing more than small branches of the same organisation, which is itself a creation of the United States and NATO. So that is Patrick Henningson's summation of all what's going on, and Patrick has done a heck of a lot of work in these Middle East correspondence. He knows his stuff. But anyway, we'll go on to the next part. Right, this is from Global Research, this article, and the title is The Relationship Between Washington and ISIS, The Evidence. Reports that US and British aircraft carrying arms to ISIS have been shot down by Iraqi forces have been met with shock and denial in Western countries. You see, people are denying it and shocked because they can't believe it. They can't believe that we're supplying them with the arms and the funds, etc., etc.
Well, yeah, if it were a British aircraft carrier, then that'd be, you know, a bit more interesting because we don't seem to have any. But it's not, so it has to be British aircraft carrying arms. Yeah, carry on, Paul.
Yeah. Few in the Middle East doubt that Washington is playing a double game with his proxy armies in Syria. But some key myths remain important amongst the significantly more ignorant Western audiences. They're ignorant because they're not being told all the facts. A central myth is that Washington now aims moderate Syrian rebels to both overthrow the Syrian government and supposedly defeat the extremist rebels. This claim became more important in 2014, when the rationale of US aggression against Syria shifted from humanitarian intervention to a renewal of Bush's war on terror. That war on terror that can never be won and will be everlasting. Lovely for all the warmongers, that word, isn't it? War on terror. The warmongers, they love that. A distinct controversy is whether the Al-Qaeda style groups, especially Jabhat Al-Nusra and ISIS, have been generated as a sort of organic reaction to the repeated US interventions, or whether they are actually paid agents of Washington. Certainly prominent ISIS leaders were held in US prisons. ISIS leader Ibrahim al-Badari, aka Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is said to have been held for between 1 and 2 years at Camp Buka in Iraq in 2006. As al-Baghdadi and others were released, the Bush administration announced its plans for a new Middle East. The new Middle East. What was wrong with the old Middle East? There's got to be a new Middle East. A plan which would employ sectarian violence as part of a process of creative destruction. Creative destruction? Where do they get these words from, PJ? A creative destruction. Get a sledgehammer, is that creative?
Oh, I'm not sure. They might come from that book that George Bush were reading, you know, the Upside Down book.
Yeah. Yeah, My Pet Goat, yeah?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, creative, yeah. Reading upside down, that's also creative. Anyway, creative destruction in the region. According to Seymour Hersh's 2007 article, The Redirection, the US would make use of moderate Sunni states, not least the Saudis, to contain the Shia gains in Iraq, brought about by the 2003 US invasion. These moderate Sunni forces would carry out clandestine operations to weaken Iran and Hezbollah, key enemies of Israel. This brought the Saudis and Israel closer, as both fear Iran. While there have been claims that the ISIS Caliphate is Baghdadi is a CIA or Mossad trained agent. Al-Baghdadi, sorry. These have not yet been well backed up. There are certainly grounds for suspicion, but independent evidence is important in the context of the supposed US war against ISIS. So what is the broader evidence on Washington's covert links with ISIS? Not least are the admissions by senior US officials that allies support the extremist group. In September 2014, General Martin Dempsey, head of the US military, told the congressional hearing, "I know major Arab allies who fund ISIS." Senator Lindsey Graham of Armed Services Committee responded with a justification. They fund them because the Free Syrian Army couldn't fight Syrian President Assad. They were trying to beat Assad. The next month, US Vice President Joe Biden went a step further, explaining that Turkey, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia were so determined to take down Assad, they poured hundreds of millions of dollars and tens of thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad. Oh, free weapons for anybody that wants them.
Can I just butt in here, Paul, at this stage?
Yes.
I just like to say, just even if this article and that none of it's true, right? Just say none of it's true, right? The fact that there's stuff being going off over there and Assad's been saying he's sticking firm ground and he's not going nowhere, and it's continued. This has been going on for how many years now in Syria?
Well, it's got to be 4, maybe 5 years.
Maybe 5 years, touching 5 years easy, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got evidence to suggest that it's not stopping, right? So even if none of this is true and there's no involvement with US or anything like that, then what's the crack? That's what I said. What's the crack?
The crack is that Syria gets on with Iran, right? And they need to take out Syria so they've got an easy corridor into Iran.
Right. Yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm aware that's the alleged motives.
Yeah, that they want they want completely surround Iran. I mean, what is it, 50 odd bases more or less surrounding Iran at the moment, US bases?
Yeah.
So Syrian is a thorn in their side.
Borders are taking everywhere,
and
yeah.
they keep trying everything to get a war against them, don't they? There was that sarin gas attack that put pay to their last attempt. So what people have to realise is all these are planned, 100 years in advance. And then, of course, they have to make adjustments while different geopolitical things change. But
well, I said the only way, end of the day, if people don't wake up or they don't make their own thought and they don't start thinking freely, right, what's going to happen is exactly what that paragraph just just said, you know, they are going to get to Assad eventually. One day it'll come, just like it did for Gaddafi and Saddam and all others, right?
And Libya, yeah.
So it's going to happen because these guys are relentless. They're not going to stop.
No, I mean, even if they step back, you can guarantee they're going to push forward again within a couple of years.
Yeah, they'll keep pushing.
Yeah.
But where you know, the people are paying, funding them, because we are really essentially every man, woman, and child is going to be funding them at one stage of their life, and you won't even realise that you're doing it. So we need to cut back on that and start, you know, that's one way we can do it. I'm not suggesting anybody to go over to Syria and start fighting like many of them alleged been doing. But ways we can do things is just think of other ways where you can.
Well, if people were to think,
less contribute, if anything, less contribute, not more contribute. You can less contribute, and that's doing something.
Yeah, if people were to think, the American government will not get the tacit approval to go ahead with it.
Well, it's interesting because my article's sort of wrapping with yours, and it touches on Russia, but we'll get to that as you finish yours.
Yeah, great, because I went into that one. Anyway, this outfit called ISIL, ISIS, God blimey, ISIS crisis. Biden's admission sought to exempt the US from this operation, as though Washington were innocent of sustained operations carried out by its key allies. That is simply not credible. Washington's relationship with the Saudis as a divisive sectarian force in the region, in particular against Arab nationalism, goes back to the 1950s. So, what, that's 60 years? 1950s, when Winston Churchill introduced the Saudi king to President Eisenhower. At that time, Washington wanted to set up the Saudi king as a rival to President Nasser of Egypt. More recently, British General Jonathan Shaw has acknowledged the contribution of Saudi Arabia's extremist ideology. This is a time bomb that, under the guise of education, Wahhabi Salafism is igniting under the world, really. And it is funded by Saudi and Qatari money, Shaw said. Other evidence undermines Western attempts to maintain a distinction between the moderate rebels, now openly armed and trained by the US, and the extremist groups Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS. While the Soviet rivalry emphasised by the London-based Muslim Brotherhood aligned Syrian Observatory of Human Rights, the absence of real ideological difference is best shown by the cooperation and mergers of groups. As ISIS came from Iraq in 2013, its Syrian bases have generally remained in the far eastern part of Syria. However, Jabhat al-Nusra, the official al-Qaeda branch in Syria, from which ISIS split, has collaborated with Syrian Islamic groups in western Syria for several years. The genocidal slogan of the Syrian Islamists, Christians to Beirut and ours to the grave, reported many times in 2011 from the Farouk Brigade, sat well with the Al-Qaeda group's Farouk. Once the largest Free Syrian Army group, indeed killed and ethnically cleansed many Christians and Alawis. Long-term cooperation between these moderate rebels and the foreign-led Jabhat al-Nusra has been seen around Daraa in the south of Homs, Idlib, along the Turkish border and in around Aleppo. The words Jabhat al-Nusra actually means support front. That is support for the Syrian Islamists back in December 2012, as Jabhat al-Nusra was banned in various countries. 29 of these groups reciprocated the solidarity in their declaration, "We are all Jabhat al-Nusra." After the collapse of the Free Syrian Army, groups' cooperation between al-Nusra and the newer US and Saudi-backed groups, Dawad, the Islamic Front, the Syrian Revolutionary Front, the Harakat Hasm, helped draw attention to Israel's support for al-Nusra. See, Israel's supporting al-Nusra. Where ISIS come from? It's crazy. As I say, ISIS is the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Anyway, around the occupied Golan Heights, since 2013, there have been many reports of rebel fighters, including those from al-Nusra, being treated in Israeli hospitals. Prime Minister Netanyahu, over there, all the trouble's over there. Even publicised his visit to wounded rebels in early 2014 that led to a public thank you from the Turkey-based rebel leader Mohammed Baghi in February of 2014. The UN peacekeeping force based in the occupied Golan has reported his observations of Israeli defence forces interacting with al-Nusra fighters at the border. At the same time, Israeli arms have been found with the extremist groups in both Syria and Iraq in November of 2014. Members of the Druze minority in the Golan protested against Israel's hospital support for the al-Nusra and ISIS fighters. This has in turn led to questions by the Israeli media as to whether Israel does in fact hospitalise members of the al-Nusra and Daesh, which is ISIS. A military spokesman reply was hardly a denial. In the past 2 years, the Israeli Defence Forces have been engaged in humanitarian life-saving aid to wounded Syrians, irrespective of their identity. The artificial distinction between rebel and extremist groups is mocked by multiple reports of large-scale defections and transfer of weapons. In July 2014, 1,000 armed men of the Dawad Brigade defected to ISIS in Iraq. In November, defections to Jabhat al-Nusra from the Syrian Revolutionary Front were reported. In December, Adib al-Shishkebab, no, sorry about that, al-Shishki, representative of the Gulf Cooperation Council of the Exile, Syrian National Coalition, said opposition fighters were increasingly joined ISIS for financial reasons in that same month. Rebels in the Israel-backed Golan area were reported as defecting to ISIS, which had by all this time began to establish a presence in Syria's far south. Then in early 2015, 3,000 moderate rebels from the US-backed Harakat Hasm collapsed into Jabhat al-Nusra, taking a large stock of US arms, including anti-tank weapons with them. ISIS already had US weapons by other means in both Iraq and Syria. As reported in July, September and October of 2014, At that time, a non-aggression pact was reported in the southern area of Hajar al-Aswad between moderate rebels and ISIS, as both recognised a common enemy in Syria, the Nusra regime, a sectarian way of referring to supposedly apostate Muslims. Some reported ISIS has bought weapons from the rebels. In December 2014, there were Western media reports of US covert supply of heavy weapons. US covert supply of heavy weapons to Syrian rebels from Libya, and of Jabhat Al-Nusra getting anti-tank weapons which had been supplied to Harakat Hasm. Video posted by Al-Nusra showed these weapons being used to take over the Syrian military bases. Wadi Dalb al-Hamidiyah in Idlib province, with major Arab allies backing ISIS and substantial collaboration between US armed moderate rebels and ISIS. It is not such a logical stretch to suppose that the US and coalition flights to ISIS areas supposedly to defend the extremists might have become covert supply lines. Now the rat lines, eh? That is precisely what senior Iraqi sources began saying in late 2014 and early 2015. For example, as reported by both Iraqi and Iranian media, Iraqi MP Majid al-Gahawi said in January that the American aircraft dropped a load of weapons and equipment to the ISIS group militants at the area of Al-Dor in the province of Salahuddin. Photos were published of ISIS retrieving the weapons, and US admitted the seizure but said this was a mistake. In February, Iraq MP Hakem al-Samedi said the Iraqi army had shot down 2 British planes which were carrying weapons to ISIS in Al-Anbar province. Again, photos were published of the wrecked planes. We have discovered weapons made in the US, European countries, and Israel from the areas liberated from ISIL's control in Al-Baghdadi region, Al-Samili said. Sorry about the pronunciation, my friends. The Al-Ahad News quoted head of Al-Anbar Provincial Council, Khalaf Taramis, saying that a US plane supplied the ISIL terrorist organisation with arms and ammunition, and Salahuddin province. In Salahuddin province. Also in February, an Iraqi militia called Al-Hashad al-Sabi said they had shot down a US Army helicopter carrying weapons for the ISIL in the western parts of al-Baghdadi region in Al-Anbar province. Again, photos were published. After that, Iraqi counter-terrorism forces were reported as having arrested 4 foreigners who were employed as military advisors to the ISIL fighters, 3 of whom were American and Israeli. So far, the Western media has avoided these stories altogether. I wonder why that is. They are very damaging to the broader Western narrative. That's why that is, I think. In Libya, a key US collaborator in the overthrow of the Gaddafi government has announced himself the newly declared head of the Islamic State in North Africa, Abdel Hakim Balagh. was held in US prisons for several years, then rendered to the Gaddafi's Libya, where he was wanted for terrorist acts as former head of the Al-Qaeda-linked Libyan Islamic fighting group. Then the Tripoli-based Libyan Dawn group, Belgium, has been defended by Washington and praised by US Congressman John McCain and Lindsey Graham. Some image softening of the Al-Qaeda group is underway. Jabhat al-Nusra is reported to be considering cutting ties to Al-Qaeda to help sponsor Qatar boost their funding. Washington's Foreign Affairs magazine even published a survey claiming that ISIS fighters were surprisingly supportive of democracy. After all, the well-published massacres that lacks credibility. The Syrian army is gradually reclaiming Aleppo despite the hostile supply lines from Turkey. Well, that's right near the Turkey border, so I can understand that. And southern Syria. In fact, of support for the sectarian groups from Jordan and Israel. The border with Lebanon is now full of control in the east. The Syrian army and its local allies control much of Hasaka and Deir el-Zor, with a final campaign against Raqqa yet to come. The NATO GCC attempt to overthrow the Syrian government has failed, yet violent destabilisation persists. Evidence of the covert relationship between Washington and ISIS is substantial and helps explain what Syria's Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal Mikdad calls Washington's cosmetic war on ISIS. The extremist group is a foothold Washington keeps in the region, weakening both Syria and Iraq. Their war on ISIS is ineffective. Studies by Jane's Terrorism and Insurgent database shows that ISIS attacks and killing in Iraq increased strongly over US air attacks and the main on the ground fighting that has carried out by the Syrian army and more recently Iraqi armed forces with Iranian backing. All this has been reported perversely in the Western media. The same channels that celebrate the ISIS killing of Syrian soldiers also claim the Syrian army is not fighting ISIS. This alleged unwillingness was part of the justification for US bombing inside Syria, while it is certainly the case that Syrian properties have remained in the heavily populated West. Local media reports make it clear that since at least the beginning of 2014, the Syrian Arab Army has been the major force engaged with ISIS in Hasaka, Raqqa and Deir el-Zor. A March 2015 Reuters report does concede that the Syrian army recently killed 2 ISIS commanders, including Deeb Hedishan al-Atabibi, along with 24 fighters at Hamadi Omar. Close cooperation between Iran, Iraq, Syria and Lebanon's Hezbollah has anathema to Israel. And Washington, yet it is happening. This is not a sectarian divide, but rather based on some clear mutual interest, not least putting an end to the sectarian takfiri terrorism. It was only logical that in the Iraq military's recent offensive on ISIS held to create the Iranian military emerged as Iraq's main partner, Washington has been sidelined, causing consternation in the US media. General Qasem Soleimani, head of Iran's Quds force, is the leading player in the Tikrit operation. A decade after Washington's creative destruction plans, weren't that creative then, was it? Decided to reduce Iranian influence in Iraq. An article in Foreign Policy magazine complains Iran's influence is at its highest point in almost 4 centuries. Yeah. Well, I will leave my other article because I think that's given a lot of information for people to mull over, PJ.
Alright, Paul, no worries.
So it's a shame. It's just this time restriction, I think, because this next article, which I was going to do, would it give you the history and the planning on what they intended to do. So it was all there.
No,
and
you can do it if you can do it as quick as you can. Like, I know it's important.
Yeah, okay. Then it's just it's the history that all this, we will show that all this was pre-planned a long time ago. Plans for Redraw in the Middle East, a project for a new Middle East. This article, first published by GR in November 2006, is of particular relevance to an understanding on the ongoing process of destabilization and political fragmentation of Iraq. Hegemony is as old as mankind. Sidney Brzezinski, former US National Security Advisor. The term New Middle East was introduced to the world in June 2006 in Tel Aviv by US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who was credited by the Western media for coining the term, in replacement of the older and more imposing term, the Greater Middle East. This shift in foreign policy phraseology coincided with the inauguration of the Baku-Tbilisi-Siay BTC oil terminal in the Eastern Mediterranean. The term and conceptualization of the new Middle East was subsequently heralded by the US Secretary of State and the Israeli Prime Minister at the height of the Anglo-American sponsored Israeli siege of Lebanon. Prime Minister Olmert and Secretary Rice had informed the international media that a project for a new Middle East sounds like a project for the new American century, don't it? Anyway, the project for the new Middle East was being launched from Lebanon. This announcement was a confirmation of an Anglo-American Israeli. Yeah, there's a bit of a trilogy going on there. Military roadmap in the Middle East. This project, which has been in the planning stages for several years, consists of creating an arc of instability, chaos and violence extending from Lebanon, Palestine and Syria to Iraq and the Persian Gulf, Iran, and the borders of NATO garrisoned Afghanistan. The New Middle East project was introduced publicly by Washington and Tel Aviv with the expectation that Lebanon would be the pressure point for the realigning of the whole Middle East and thereby unleashing the forces of constructive chaos. This constructive chaos, which generates conditions of violence and warfare throughout the region, would in turn be used so that the United States, Britain and Israel could redraw the map of the Middle East in accordance with their geostrategic needs and objectives. The new Middle East map, Secretary of Israel is stating during the press conference that what we're seeing here in regards to the destruction of Lebanon and the Israeli attacks on Lebanon, in a sense, is a growing the birth pangs of a new Middle East. And whatever we do, we, meaning the United States, have to be certain that we're pushing forward to the new Middle East and not going back to the old one. Secretary Rice, was immediately criticised for her statements both within Lebanon and internationally for expressing indifference to the suffering of an entire nation which was being bombed indiscriminately by the Israeli Air Force. The Anglo-American military roadmap in the Middle East and Central Asia. US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice's speech on the new Middle East has set the stage. The Israeli attacks on Lebanon, which have been fully endorsed by Washington and London, have further compromised and validated the existence of the geostrategic objectives of the United States, Britain and Israel. According to Professor Mark Levine, the neoliberal globalizers and neoconservatives, and ultimately the Bush administration, would latch on to the creative destruction as a way of describing the process by which they hope to create their new world orders. New world orders. And that creative destruction in the United States was, in the words of neoconservative philosopher and Bush advisor Michael Ledeen, an awesome revolutionary force for creative destruction. Anglo-American occupied Iraq, particularly Iraqi Kurdistan, seems to be the preparatory ground for the balkanization, division, and finalization, pacification of the Middle East. Already at the legislative framework under the Iraqi Parliament and the name of Iraqi federalization for the partition of Iraq into 3 portions is being drawn out. See map below, but we'll carry on here. We'll see that later. Moreover, the Anglo-American military roadmap appears to be vying for entry into Central Asia via the Middle East. The Middle East, Afghanistan and Pakistan are stepping stones for extending US influence into the former Soviet Union and the ex-Soviet republics of Central Asia. The Middle East is, to some extent, the southern tier of Central Asia. Central Asia, in turn, is also termed as Russia's southern tier, or the Russian near abroad. Many Russians and Central Asian scholars, military planners, strategists, security advisors, economists and politicians consider Central Asia, Russian subtier, to be the vulnerable soft underbelly of the Russian Federation 3. It should be noted in his book, The Grand Chessboard, that's Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, by the way, The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperative. Zbigniew Brzezinski, a former US National Security Advisor, alluded to the modern Middle East as a control lever of an area he, Brzezinski, calls the Eurasian Balkans. Eurasian Balkans consist of the Caucasus, Georgia, and the Republic of Azerbaijan and Armenia. And the Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Sorry about the pronunciation there. Yeah, and Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. Cool, there's a lot of stands around.
I think the word you're looking for is Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, right. Thank you. and to some extent, both Iran and Turkey. Iran and Turkey both form the northernmost tiers of the Middle East, excluding the Caucasus, that edge into Europe and the former Soviet Union. A map of the new Middle East. The relatively unknown map of the Middle East, NATO garrison, Afghanistan and Pakistan has been circulating around strategic government NATO policy and military circles since mid-2006. It has been casually allowed to surface in public, maybe an attempt to build consensus and to slowly prepare the general public, yeah, prep them all right, for possible maybe even cataclysmic changes in the Middle East. This is a map of a redrawn and restructured Middle East identifies the new Middle East. Now this is absolutely terrible. What gives these people the right to attack these sovereign countries? These countries are doing nothing to the Americans, nothing to NATO. It's land grab, isn't it? It's complete power and land grab. And it is, as I say, it's to bring in all the different regions for the New World Order. Yeah, I'll leave it there because I've gone quite a bit with my articles. So if you want to go ahead with your articles, PJ, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, there's always a lot to cover when we touching across this sort of stuff. So, but yeah, an hour and a half's a decent report, I think. So that's good information you put across there. So I'll go ahead now and bring up what I've got.
Right.
Expanding on what you've been talking about.
Yeah, I have nothing of yours coming through at the moment, PJ. Oh, thank you.
There you go. You see that, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Alright, this is, so as the other parts of the world's looking on, in Canada, well, on the 15th of March, thousands unite across Canada against a new anti-terror law. So there's a video here, which I'm going to start off with. Don't seem to have any sound. Let's try this again. Take it back. There we go. So there you go. Going into this article, if you're not too sure what they was saying, they were saying no to the bill C-51. Demonstrators across Canada marched against the new anti-terror bill, which they believe violates Canadians' civil liberties and online privacy rights. In an RT report, thousands of demonstrators have united across Canada to take action against proposed anti-terrorism legislation known as the Bill C-51, which would expand the powers of police and the nation's spy agency, especially when it comes to detaining terror suspects. Organisers of the Day of Action said that over 70 communities across Canada were planning to participate on Saturday, according to StopC51.ca website. So these gatherings were reported in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, Ottawa, and Halifax. Widespread there in Canada. Really worried about democracy. This country is going in a really bad direction. Prime Minister Stephen Harper is taking it into a really bad direction. Protester Stuart Basden from Toronto, the Canadian city which saw hundreds of people come out, told the Star. Freedom to speak out against the government is probably in jeopardy. Even if you're just posting stuff online, you could be targeted. So it's a really terrifying bill, Basden added. The ruling Conservative government tabled the legislation back in January, arguing that the new law would improve the safety of Canadians. Now, a personal thing to me, this article answered a question to an experience that I recently had, which I'm not going to go into. But yeah, that's the one in Canada. So whilst Canada and Harper's being at it, what we doing in UK to deal with things like terrorism? Well, Nick Clegg's idea is blocks terror laws banning extremists from universities. Laws to ban extremist speakers have been blocked by the Liberal Democrats for fears of eroding free speech after one of the worst cabinet rows of the coalition. And here it is, Nick Clegg. I'm sorry, the one who tripled tuition fees. And he said he weren't.
Yeah. But they're using terrorism as for a blanket word for ripping away everybody's rights and freedoms, aren't they?
Yes, and the particular age cap being targeted seems to be the students, which is interesting, you know, because these are the ones that are most likely to get online and do a bit of activism, in my opinion. Nick Clegg has blocked tough new laws intended to stop extremist speakers brainwashing university students for terrorism, raising fears that Britain will be left more vulnerable to attack. The Deputy Prime Minister personally vetoed the plan during private talks with David Cameron, after one of the worst cabinet rows in the coalition's 5-year rule. Mr. Clegg said he could not support moves to require university bosses to vet visiting speakers and prevent impressionable students from falling under the spell of extremists, because Liberal Democrats feared the move would erode free speech. Draft legal guidelines detailing how the ban would work, which were published by the Home Office in December, have now been scrapped. Senior government sources warned that students would remain at risk of radicalisation by preachers visiting campus Islamic societies. Theresa May, the Home Secretary, told the Tory Graph that academics must now play their part in preventing radicalisation, even though there is no government guidance on how they should tackle extremist speakers. Should university bosses be legally forced to vet visiting speakers? I'll let you answer this one, Blackhole. Would you say yes or no? Which one's your answer?
My answer is that they're just using any excuse to clamp down on our freedoms.
Right, so you'd be on no, it's an erosion of freedom of speech?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to click on it because that's what they do. They like to do surveys and
Yeah.
get an idea on how people's thinking. So a little tip out there: if you see these surveys, don't get involved with them.
It's ridiculous that they're using non-violent extremists. What's that? Somebody that says I don't agree with the government.
Well, that's that, innit? The disclosure follows warnings from Mrs. May now, and others that new rules are badly needed to clamp down on campus extremism. The issue rose to the top of the national security agenda after it emerged that Mohammed Anwaze, the Islamist murderer known as Jihadi John, may have been radicalised while a student in London. Anwaze was unmasked as the man who beheaded American and British hostages while fighting with the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Terrorism experts have warned that student union Islamic societies are vulnerable to exploitation by radical speakers who want to brainwash undergraduates to their violent interpretations of Islam. The new legal
Excuse me. Violent interpretations. How can an interpretation be violent? They're trying to equate non-violent extremists with these boogeymen that are chopping people's heads off. It's a linkage. They're trying to link people's feelings over to using real bad people for real moderate people that just say, no, I don't agree with that.
Well, I don't group anybody. I take everybody on an individual basis. You know what I mean? Like I can expect anybody to do to me. I wouldn't. You know, I'm not part of any group. So.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, it's a gradual nudging. It's a nudging, and it's a psychological nudge.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see your point. I can see your point there, Paul. A new legal duty to be ratified by MPs later this month will require publicly funded organisations, including schools, NHS trusts, nurseries and universities, to actively work to prevent vulnerable people from becoming radicalised or converted to terrorist causes. A draft of statutory Home Office guidance on how institutions should fulfil their new legal duty, known as the Prevent Duty, was published in December. It stipulated that universities must introduce stringent checks on all visiting speakers who are invited to address students on campus and require student unions to give university authorities at least 14 days notice to allow for background checks and cancellation of the event if necessary. However, the plans were blocked by Vince Cable, the Liberal Democrat business secretary, who is responsible for universities' policy, after academics said the measures would interfere with their duty to promote free speech and debate. The row became public earlier this month, and after failed negotiations between Mr. Cable and Mrs. May had to be escalated for Mr. Cameron and Mr. Clegg to resolve. The Deputy Prime Minister told Mr. Cameron the Lib Dems would not support the new rules, and as a result the entire section of Home Office guidance on how universities should handle visiting speakers has been axed. Urging universities to root out extremism, the Home Secretary, Mrs. May, told the Sunday Telegraph, tackling the radicalisation of young people is not and cannot ever be the sole responsibility of the government and law enforcement agencies. The new Prevent duty means universities will have a legal obligation to play their part, and I hope they do as fully as possible.
I can see it now, PJ, sitting in the debating society with tape over your mouth.
It's coming soon if we don't do stuff about it.
Yeah.
My next one, Savile victims. This is Sky News. Clarkson comparison is upsetting. Victims denounced claims attributed to a senior BBC figure that Clarkson's status has allowed him to behave however he likes. Victims of Jimmy Savile have described comparisons between the support for Jeremy Clarkson and the widespread protection offered to the dead paedophile as upsetting and totally offensive. The Mail on Sunday claimed one of the BBC's most senior executives had made the analogy. According to the paper, the unnamed figure said Clarkson had been allowed to behave however he wished because of his status and his friendship with the likes of David Cameron. It follows Clarkson's suspension for allegedly punching TV producer Oisin Timon during an argument about a lack of hot food following filming. The Mail on Sunday quoted the BBC figure as saying, "The pressure this guy," meaning Timon, "is under is so Savile-sky in a way." So here's a video for those that have not seen it. Play it for you now.
Look, of course, I don't know exactly what happened. He is a constituent of mine. He's a friend of mine. He's a huge talent. I see that he said he regrets some of what happens. Or I'd say because he is a talent and he does amuse and entertain so many people, including my children, would be heartbreaking if Top Gear is taken off air. I hope this can be sorted out because it's a great program and he's a great talent.
There you go.
I didn't see this escapade, but did the bloke attack Clarkson?
Did the bloke attack? No, the alleged.
So Clarkson punched the guy. He should be in court for ABH.
Well, that's my previous report I did a few days ago when it came out, and you know I was saying like, is this not assault? I mean, if that were me or you, Blackhole, we'd be dealt with that day.
We'd be up in front of the judge.
There's no civil thing in this. This is you know common law, is it not?
Yeah.
Right, well, if you look at what David Cameron says, or what former Culture Secretary Miriam Miller says, and you swap Clarkson for Savile, you get this. David Cameron is effectively saying that Savile's a real talent. Miriam Miller saying Savile will be Savile. Liz Dukes, a lawyer at the firm representing 169 of Savile's victims, denounced the comparison. She said many of Savile's victims... Go on, Blackhole, it's alright, I'll pause.
How dare he? Just because he's the Prime Minister, he's allowed to say stupid things like that and get away with it. And just because Clarkson's a friend of a stupid Prime Minister, that is allowed to get away with it.
Well, I'm pretty, you know, I reserve my judgment on him, to be honest. Well, I'm not, because when you're looking into this stuff, in order to be able to do it on a continual basis, right, you can't allow things to work you up and get you riled up, which is so easy for it to do.
Yeah, no, I'm not getting riled up, I'm just...
Which is part of the... No, which I'm saying, which is part of the design of it all, to be honest with you. But yeah, I can totally relate to that, Paul, you know.
Yeah.
But coming from Liz Dukes, a lawyer at the firm representing the 169 Savile's victims, she said many of Savile's victims find a direct parallel between these issues to be upsetting and highly inappropriate. One victim said that while both have celebrity status, to suggest other similarities is totally offensive. Nevertheless, they wanted the lessons from Savile learned, whereby fame and celebrity must never be an excuse to overlook wrongdoing. Another video here. Play for you.
Hi Jeremy. Top Gear's Jeremy Clarkson returning home to waiting photographers after his suspension by the BBC for what they have called a fracas. But now the allegations against him have taken a new direction. People in the hotel bar where it happened say he used foul language and told a colleague he'd have him fired in a row over food.
I'd heard that they come from down south.
The Ward family from Leeds told me they were excited to be on holiday last Wednesday at the same Yorkshire Dales hotel as the Top Gear team. That is, until the presenters arrived at 9:30 at night.
Jeremy Clarkson come through and said, any chance of a selfie, Jeremy? And he says, no, not what day that I've had today. So I more or less sat down with my tail between my legs.
Within minutes, they say, Clarkson directed a torrent of 4-letter abuse at a colleague.
He hadn't done his job properly. It was ridiculous that there was nothing to eat, and that he would, obviously there's lots of expletives in between all this, and that he would be losing his job. He would see to it that he would lose his job. It was just the shock of, how can someone be so rude? You know, the fact of not having his photograph taken, we understood that completely, and they must get fed up with that. But it was just the swearing and the length of time, and this poor guy that he was ripping into.
Top Gear is the BBC's biggest global brand, worth more than £50 million a year. But with Clarkson suspended, the next 3 episodes have been scrapped. More than 750,000 people have signed a petition for him to keep his job. The only big Top Gear fan among the Ward family thinks he should.
He's brash. We know what he's like. He's been in trouble before. I think he'll be in trouble again. But I don't think he'll lose his job at BBC. I think he'll continue to do that job because without Clarkson, there's no Top Gear, I don't think.
Among the holiday snaps the Wards took last week of Top Gear cars and the snow is one last picture. The patio, the morning after the row at an empty hotel. A distant figure with his back to the camera. Jeremy Clarkson, alone and facing an uncertain future. Gerard Tubb, Sky News, Leeds.
There was further fallout of the fracas in the Sunday Times, with Clarkson's food critic friend here, Jill, revealing it was the Top Gear presenter himself who brought the matter to the BBC's attention. So going into that, there's another one. Is Clarkson finished with the BBC?
Yeah, but I don't call it a fracas. I call it a proper name, an attack. He attacked the guy.
Accused him of being a lazy Irishman.
You called the producer lazy Irish.
The normally outspoken presenter had nothing to say about that today. Instead, he wrote a cryptic newspaper column about dinosaurs. The suggestion, it would seem, is that this most imposing of terrestrial creatures might be on the brink of extinction. Writing in The Sun, he said, "One day all the dinosaurs died, and now, many years later, no one mourns their passing. You can start as many campaigns as you like and call on the support of politicians from all sides, but the day must come when you have to wave goodbye to the big monsters and move on. We lose one animal and get another. The world turns." Website producer Ian Morris used to be part of the Top Gear team and remembers Oshin fondly.
Photos quite a, shows what sort of guy he was. He was always very friendly to me.
He thinks the BBC is ready to say goodbye to Jeremy Clarkson.
I know there's always been tension between particularly him and the BBC, but also Top Gear as a whole and the BBC. I mean, it's one of those shows that it doesn't necessarily fit with the BBC's sort of attitude, and politically, Jeremy Clarkson's a bit of a, he's slightly different to the standard BBC people, I suppose.
Jeremy Clarkson's fate will be decided by the BBC's disciplinary panel, and their investigation could take some time, but all this will they, won't they fire him might be a moot point, because Richard Hammond, James May and Jeremy Clarkson will all be out of contract by the end of the month, so sacking him might not be necessary.
Look, there it is.
The reasons to keep Clarkson are compelling. Top Gear generates around £50 million a year, and nearly 1 million Top Gear fans have signed a petition demanding he be reinstated.
I'm reveling in these short wheelbase!
Whatever BBC bosses eventually decide, it's unlikely to be popular.
Eat my exhaust fumes, dinosaur!
Richard Suchet, Sky News.
Me personally, I think his playtime's finished. The BBC will probably not be too far behind him. Yeah, no BBC, you'll have no Top Gear, so what's the point worrying about it anyway? Led by Ken McQuarrie, the head of BBC Scotland, the investigation will try to establish what happened on the night of 4th of March at the Simonston Hotel in Hawes, North Yorkshire, after Clarkson was told the chef had stopped serving hot food. It will also take into account Clarkson's other controversies over the past 2 years. The BBC spokesman said the BBC's position is the one we set out in a statement last week. We have an investigation led by Ken McQuarrie to establish the facts, and people should wait for the outcome of that. Nearly 1 million people have signed a petition calling for Clarkson to be reinstated. 1 million. And how many went to London and stood out in the Iraq war protesting with that 1 million?
So 1 million people sign a petition and they're more likely getting kept on. What about the other 59 million?
I'll quickly move on. Revealed, UK government bans filming at an immigrant detention centre to avoid bad publicity. Any guesses, Paul? Go on, give me one guess. Which one you think it is?
Yarl's would maybe.
Right, well, we'll go ahead to see if you're right. The Al-Nusra detention centre near London's main Heathrow Airport. UK authorities have banned filming at Harmondsworth Immigration Removal Centre, where hundreds of asylum seekers are on hunger strike. It is to avoid public criticism of the facility's poor conditions, a staff member said, unaware he was being recorded. Investigative journalists from the Corporate Watch Group snuck into Harmondsworth with a hidden camera and received a pretty straightforward answer from an employee on why no filming is allowed. So you're in government and you have an illegal immigrant detention centre, which is this detention centre, yeah, and the detainees all have their phones with them, right? And a fight kicks off, or like there's bad conditions, which in this centre there's bad conditions, right? Unidentified Harmondsworth staff member said. And people, you guys, are taking photos of these bad conditions like rats and whatever other shit that's in here, and you're sending it outside, sending it to news, whatever. That looks bad for the government, doesn't it? Yeah, dude. So in a video here we shall play at the end. The poor conditions at the facility located near London's Heathrow Airport have forced nearly half of the inmates to go on hunger strike. The strike has entered its 7th day. A social media campaign to support inmates kept in detention centres has been launched under the hashtag #DetainedVoices. Activists protested outside the London detention centre on Saturday, backing the hunger strikes and demanding that Harmondsworth and similar centres across the UK shut down. RT's Harry Fear reported from the British capital, which is a video there which I'll play after. So going to a couple of these now, starting off with this one.
I don't know, because I've only been in this job for a month, I have no idea yet. My thinking behind why that would be is because the government, right? Say you're in government, right, and you have an illegal immigrant centre, which is what this is, right? Yeah. And they all have their phones with it, right? And the fight kicks off. Or, like, there's bad conditions, which there's bad conditions, right? And you've got to take a photo of these bad conditions, like the rats or whatever shit. Yeah, they're all like, and you're sending this, and you're sending that outside, sending it to news, whatever. That looks bad for the government, doesn't it? But then all these sending fights, or you're sending like, or someone's cutting themselves and you're taking a picture of that and sending it outside and being like, look what's happening. That's bad. Exactly. I've been here 1 year now. My self-confidence is there. I understand. I understand what you're saying. That's probably the reason behind that, do you know what I mean? Because they don't talk about it.
There you go, quite really. So we'll go on to the second one. Oh, these ones are playing with that now. Oh dear, let's try again.
Now, a mass hunger strike at a UK immigrant detention centre has gone into its 7th day, with protests now spreading to facilities across Britain. RT, along with independent journalists and organisations, have collected some of the inmates' stories.
The condition here is very bad nowadays, totally like a prison. No one is allowed to go out. Officers who are working in here, they're very racist with us, they're like behaving with us like an animal.
They don't have ears to hear, they don't have heart to beat. When the guys were protesting outside, they said, go inside, otherwise we use hardware to put you people inside and lock up. The water was shut for all day. We are dying. One of my pets went to the hospital, started vomiting because he was not eating. Now we don't know where he is.
We are slaves here. We are treated like criminals. We are being intimidated here. We are being harassed here. If you are dying, you die in your room. Please help us to achieve the truth.
The hunger strike began at the Harmondsworth Immigration Removal Centre. It's a complex of rather bland-looking buildings located on the outskirts of London, close to Heathrow Airport. However, there is one thing about it that stands out. The whole centre is surrounded by high fences and barbed wire, making it look a lot like a prison. The centre houses around 600 immigrants, and around half of those held there are now on hunger strike. RT's Harry Fear reports from outside the facility in London.
Well, protesters are here outside chanting freedom from the outside of the Colnbrook and Harmondsworth immigration removal centres, and they are supporting, with this solidarity protest just on the outside of this fence, those detainees inside who are also protesting, wanting these centres to be shut down. This is now day 7 of more than 150 detainees' hunger strikes. Their message that they want to be heard is that their indefinite detention in these centres is inhuman. Joining me now is Ahmed, who was detained in this removal centre for 2.5 months. He's from Uganda. Could you please describe to me what these centres are like? I understand that they're akin to Category B prisons.
The detention centre is kind of, it is so inhuman that they lock people around all the time. There's no freedom. There's no freedom of expression. The healthcare system is so inhuman.
We've seen detainees sending us messages from the windows, the barred windows, holding up posters today and their hands against the glass. How desperate is their situation inside?
They are very desperate because most of them have stayed there for more than a year. Others have stayed there for even three years. And that's how bad the situation is. They're really desperate. They want to come out of this place, and that's why we have come here to fight to see that the detention centers are closed down and people are let free, because this is Britain claims to be a country of freedom. So the only way for us to fight against this is to make sure they close down the detention centers and allow those people inside there to also enjoy the freedom that any other person is enjoying at the moment.
Ahmed, thank you very much for talking to RT. We also learned last night some reports that in some cases phones had been confiscated by the authorities here. Also some reports which are unconfirmed that in some cases news websites have been blocked on the internet, the internet-enabled computers in some of these centres which detainees are able to use. And campaigners say that authorities have blocked these sites in order to stem the growing momentum of these hunger-striking protests. Now, these protests have not really yet been covered properly by the mainstream media here in the UK.
Harmondsworth Immigration Removal Centre has had its fair share of controversy. In 2004, there were major disturbances after an immigrant committed suicide there. 2 years later, riot police were brought in to halt a protest after a damning inspector's report was issued. And last year, there was a non-violent protest which was broken up by security forces. When the hunger strike began, the British Home Office released a statement. It insisted that detention and removal are essential parts of effective immigration controls. It also claimed that they take the dignity and respect of detainees seriously. And the chief executive running the detention facility says that it tries to create the best possible environment for detainees. But the actual state of affairs with that is hard to verify, as filming inside is banned. However, investigative journalists from the Corporate Watch Group managed to sneak in with a hidden camera. And they asked a member of staff why videotaping is prohibited. You can hear the answer for yourself.
There you go. You can hear the answer for yourself. I'll stop it there as we've seen the video already, haven't we? So I'll move on now to my. Go on, say again, Paul.
Yeah, I wonder whether these are private run detention centres, like run by Sodexo or Serco or likes.
Yeah. Well, it's still sticking with the detention centres, removal centres, or control centres, whatever you want to call them. Shut down Yarl's Wood, because we are going to go on to Yarl's Wood now. This is the Bedfordshire News. The campaign launched by the Bedfordshire on Sunday to shut down Yarl's Wood has received support from the Health Scrutiny Committee, and members want to see further action taken. The chairwoman, Councillor Louise King, said, "I support the work that Bedfordshire on Sunday is doing, but this whole issue goes further than just simply closing down Yarl's Wood. We need to see an entire system overhaul. Rather than just closing this offending institution, we need to see judicial changes to stop these women just being moved on to another place." She added that the committee had specific concerns about the centre, including the women's lack of privacy, unsuitable facilities, and the effect the recent removal of counselling has had on their mental health. While Councillor King has not had the opportunity to visit within the last 2 weeks, she has been informed by the Home Office that the temperature in Yarl's Wood is not good. King said, "I have heard directly from the Home Office that many of the women are extremely upset at the things they have heard. To hear themselves being described as animals is devastating, and has made many of them lose any trust they may have had." During the visit to Yarl's Wood on Friday by Lord Michael Bates, Bedford MP Richard Fuller highlighted Bedfordshire on Sunday's campaign, which the Lord said would form an important part of the ongoing discussion. Ongoing.
Just
There you go.
no action, but just the discussion.
Just a little natter. Just a wee chat. Oh, my apologies. I've just done a staff there for a moment and dropped my microphone. First time that on Flux, but here we go. Time's going on. My next one is the New York Police Department co-editing Wikipedia page for Eric Garner death. This is a post from Stuart Hooper with the 21st Century Wire. Can this really be called anything other than outright censorship? The Wikipedia articles for the deaths of 3 individuals involved with the New York Police Department, including the highly controversial death of Eric Garner, have been edited on computers that can be traced back to the New York Police Department's headquarters. Articles on alleged instances of police brutality and articles critical of the force's conduct were edited, while attempts were even made to try and delete the pages. In the Garner case, Garner raised both his arms in the air, was changed to Garner flailed his arms about as he spoke, and use of the chokehold has been prohibited, was changed to use of the chokehold is legal, but has been prohibited. In 2006, someone from within the New York Police Department deleted 1,502 characters from the Scandals and Corruption section of Wikipedia's New York City Police Department's entry. The NYPD spokeswoman, Detective Cheryl Crispin, said the matter is under internal review. As you can see, the image there, the chokehold. Last year, numerous Western governments were caught in a similar practice, editing pages which could potentially damage their credibility. Wikipedia's founder Jimmy Wales is now launching a lawsuit against the NSA and Department of Justice over their surveillance programs. So the NYPD accused of editing the pages on Wikipedia for the Eric Garner death and other scandals. The RT report, the New York Police Department is reviewing reports that computers connected to the New York Police Department's own network edited the Wikipedia pages for some of the most infamous recent events to involve the force, including the choking death of Eric Garner. Wikipedia articles pertaining to at least 3 individuals who died as a result of altercations with the New York Police Department, including Garner, were edited out of the department's First Police Plaza headquarters, Capitol, New York, reported on Friday. According to publicly available records of the online encyclopedia's revision history, computers connected to the Internet Protocol, or IP, addresses traced back to the paper to the New York Police Department headquarters edited and sometimes attempted to delete entries on alleged instances of police brutality and articles critical of the force's conduct, along with a page of Garner, the Staten Island man who died last July after being placed in a chokehold by the NYPD officer Daniel Pantaleo. Wikipedia articles detailing no fewer than 2 other deaths involving the Big Apple's Boys in Blue were altered by computers connected to the agency's complex in downtown Manhattan. Kelly Wheel reported for Capital New York this week. There you go. The outright censorship, is it not? The next one.
They should be done for accessory to murder. I mean, if they're actually removing, what was it, 1,500 characters? That's a good couple of pages.
Yeah. Well, the next one, Russia declares a state of war with UK nuclear orders issued. No, this is an article posted by Sean Adel-Tabatabe in the YourNewsWire.com. The Russian Ministry of Defense has declared a state of war, activating the Dead Hand nuclear order issued to the strategic missile forces. The order came after it was discovered that the UK had nuclear warheads pointed towards Russia, were apparently preparing a first strike against military and civilian targets. The source of the intelligence is unknown, but it's possible that the accident rerouting of sensitive UK nuclear data through Russia this week could have provided Russia with the necessary intelligence to reach their conclusion. The intention of the nuclear forces of the UK preparing a first strike against the Federation, this report says, was revealed by the Federal Security Services. Electronic intelligence experts working in conjunction with Kaspersky Lab, who discovered last month a massive US National Security Agency cyber espionage program targeting not just Russia, but everyone else on Earth. Both the FSB and Kaspersky Lab experts, the MOD reports, were able to swiftly reverse engineer the computer code or codes involved in this massive NSA spying operation, which then enabled them to electronically obtain the launching codes and coordinates of all the UK's nuclear weapons, showing their plan to launch a first strike against the Federation during the week of 15th of March. Though information of this highly successful FSB Kaspersky Lab intelligence operation has been suppressed in the West, some counter news of it has been reported by a few technical websites, including The Verge, which in their article reported yesterday titled "A Network Error Routed Traffic for the UK's Nuclear Weapons Agency through Russia Telecom." In part says, open quotes, "For the past week, something strange has been going on in the European internet. For 5 days, web traffic from Texas to certain addresses in the UK have been routed through Ukrainian Russian telecoms, taking a detour thousands of miles out of the way. Network traffic often takes a circuitous route as a result of network congestion or interconnection difficulties, but neither one would be enough to account for these routes. Instead, This was the result of a bad route announced by Ukraine's Vega Telecom, inserting itself in between. It's particularly disconcerting because of the sensitive nature of many of the sites involved. Among the dozens of sites involved was the UK's Atomic Weapons Establishment, which is tasked with managing and delivering the UK's nuclear warheads, as well as the UK's official mail service, the Royal Mail. US defence contractor Lockheed Martin was also running a VPN connection that was caught up in the redirection. Upon the MOD's confirmation of the UK's intention to launch a nuclear first strike against the Federation, this report continues. Russian military forces throughout the country were immediately activated, with a special emphasis placed upon massive rocket artillery maneuvers on the southern borders. Foreign Minister Lavrov, this report notes, further warned the West that this week that Moscow would respond to NATO in an adequate way, as thousands of Norwegian troops near the border this week preparing for the influx of a US Marine Expeditionary Brigade estimated to number between 14 to 18,000, whose tanks, armoured vehicles, artillery, ammunition and battle equipment have flooded into Norway this past year. The MOD also in this report states that the Ministry for Civil Defence, Emergencies and Elimination of Consequences of Natural Disasters and the Ministry of Internal Affairs previously issued an immediate travel ban on firefighters, ambulance drivers, rescue troopers, tens of thousands of police officers, prison guards and other law enforcement agencies who are deemed critically needed during times of war. Also to be noted, though not contained in this MOD report, are reports from London that Russian personnel and officers have evacuated their embassy, and that a mass of activity is now being reported throughout Moscow, especially in and around Red Square, as President Putin, top political officials and military leaders are now under MOD protection. Other reports of unknown quality state that the Kremlin has also advised journalists not to leave Moscow and to prepare for a major announcement over the next few days. Though not specifically stated in this MOD report, but strongly alluded to, are that crisis negotiations between Moscow and the West are currently ongoing and have led within the last few hours to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg stating that the alliance does not plan to interfere in the conflict in East Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member of NATO, so there is a difference between Ukraine and NATO members, because the security guarantee is for NATO allies. This NATO assurance, however, may do little to calm this crisis. An advert nuclear war after the Federation's investigative committee launched a criminal case against Robert Scales, a retired US Major General and a Fox News military analyst, who said in a live broadcast this week that the only way for the US to turn the tide in Ukraine is to start killing Russians. It is game, set and match in Ukraine. The only way the US can have any effect in this region and turn the tide is to start killing Russians, he said. Killing so many Russians that even Putin's media can't hide the fact that Russians are returning to the motherland in body bags. There you go.
Well, this Ukraine business is stank ever since what, February of last year, when Victoria Nuland was on the phone to the EU ambassador, and she said FUCK, EU and that, and they were trying to, they were actually discussing about who they were going to get in power there. So it's obvious. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say recently there were reports on Putin, you know, had allegedly been killed or something. Don't know if you picked up on that in the past few days.
Yeah, apparently the guy that was shot in Moscow Square was really of no significance. And it's been blown out of proportion by the Western world as per normal, just like Cameron,
And then we have the incident with the jets flying in the international airspace.
Yeah, there was in international airspace, and it was just normal. But I mean, it's obvious if you've got America and NATO and that pushing against your borders when they have broken all the terms and treaties that were made, you're going to start pushing as close as you can get to theirs, yet they stayed in international airspace.
Yeah. Well, that's the end of that one, which is the final one. So, which is also could be tied in, if you want to tie it in with the previous one, but government breaking military covenant over veterans' care. Lord Richards, former chief of the defence staff, says government rules which see some veterans forced to pay for their own care are unfair and must be addressed. This is a Telegraph article by Ben Farmer. The government is breaking the military covenant with unfair rules that leave wounded veterans forced to pay for their own care, a former chief of the defence staff has said. Lord Richards of Herstmansuits, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, called for an overhaul of a system described as profoundly unfair by one military charity. He spoke amid growing calls from MPs for a change to government guidelines which see thousands of injured and wounded having to use compensation to fund their care. More than 60 MPs have signed up to a Royal British Legion campaign, protesting at government rules which see those hurt before the April 2005 forced to use war pensions to pay for council care. Yet those hurt later are covered by a different scheme which sees their payouts protected. Civilians injured in the workplace also see payouts protected. Lord Richards said, "I believe the current situation represents a breach of the military covenant. We must ensure that our veterans are not disadvantaged for receiving payments they are entitled to. It cannot be right to discriminate against an injured veteran in the area of social care. This is an anomaly that could potentially affect over 100,000 veterans. It is unfair and must be addressed." An estimated 4,000 injured former servicemen and women across England, Scotland and Wales are currently being forced to give up compensation money under government guidelines for social care. Under the current guidelines, which are followed by nearly 9 out of 10 local authorities, councils can treat nearly all of a war pension given to veterans injured before the 6th of April 2005 as income which must be used to pay for care. Yet veterans given compensation under the later Armed Forces Compensation Scheme see their payouts protected from councils. The Royal British Legion says the two-tier system is profoundly unfair, has launched the Insult to Injury campaign to try to get the government to protect war pensions from being used to pay for care. There's a tweet there. Goes into more. Albert Johns, a 70-year-old former soldier from Bishop Auckland, receives a war pension of £328.96 per month for injuries he received while serving. He now has dementia and Parkinson's disease and lives in a care home. His local council takes all but £10 per week of his pension to fund his care, leaving his wife, Anne, who also served in the army, with little money. She said, "I don't have a lot of money left over once I pay the bills and mortgage, so it would be a great relief if the Legion succeeds in changing the current system. My husband and I both served and I don't feel it's right that we should have to pay for Hubbert's care. when other veterans injured after 2005 don't have to pay. It's not fair that any veteran should have to pay. They should all be treated equally. Another veteran, Andy Gollett, 49, living in Sturchley, Birmingham, said he was worried he may one day lose his war pension if he becomes frail and needs care. Mr. Gollett receives a war pension of approximately £137 a month after developing post-traumatic stress disorder following his 14-year army career. He said, "I currently don't receive any social care, but it worries me that the council will take my war pension if I ever need support in the future. I think the system is totally unfair. If it doesn't change, then I will need to think ahead and organise my money. I simply can't afford to lose that extra money every month. I hope the insult to injury campaign is successful. Being injured by service is bad enough to deal with." The Department of Health said it is overhauling social care for everyone and was working with the Legion. It said the war pension could not be compared with the later compensation scheme. That's my final article there for you. I'll let you comment.
These people are putting their life and limbs on the line for the security of their country and everybody that lives in it. And this is how they're treated. How insidious.
Yeah. Well, 2 hour 20-minute Flux news. I don't know how we managed to achieve it really, Blackhole, but I'm going to cut it there because I'm a little bit exhausted after that. So I'm going to get off my chair because I've got another number. I'm going to get myself a drink. But do join us again tomorrow. And thanks for tuning in for today. And yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. It's bye from me.
And bye from me.